And without any further ado, may I please welcome Jonathan Barr Heinen. Woo!
Thanks. Happy birthday. Yeah, no. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Jonathan. Happy birthday to you. Thanks. Thank you. Something else important happened 39 years ago today. AC/DC released Back in Black. Which is almost as important as me being born. Thank you all for getting up for this. I've had the chance to read here now for several times, and I have Wyatt, Megan, and Adam to thank for that. I'd also like to thank the staff, who are each wonderful and impressive in wildly different ways. And I'd like to congratulate Gwen and Leah. I'm very excited to see what the future holds. I'm going to read from the second chapter of a historical novel I've been working on for a while. It's set in the spring of 1937 and told from alternating points of view. The first is Sarah Billard, a 14-year-old whose dreams of escaping the drought and dust storms that plague the Oklahoma Panhandle are stymied by her father, Joseph, who resorts to increasingly desperate measures to save their crops. Acting on the advice of an old wives' tale, he hangs dead snakes from the barbed wire surrounding their southwestern quarter in the hopes it'll bring rain to the wheat growing there. The second perspective is Eugene Lugoff, a con artist who, along with his younger sister, Ruby, flees a failed robbery in Santa Fe that left a man shot dead and Ruby badly beaten. While putting distance between themselves and the crime, they're waylaid by a massive dust storm, and that's where I'll begin reading. It's called Empire of Dirt. I should also tell you that with a bag of sugar and some potassium nitrate, which is more commonly known as saltpeter, and found in stump killer fertilizers and some curing salts, you can make a pretty versatile explosive. That's part of the story. I'm not just giving you general knowledge. Really, there's a picture of Leah just looking at me. It's making me really nervous. In the morning, after the storm had passed, they sat in the airflow on the side of the road a few hundred miles from Santa Fe. Eugene rolled down the window and spat, trying to clear the grit from his mouth, but he could still feel grains of dirt rubbing against his teeth and tongue and tickling the back of his throat. The dust that had snuck into the sedan during the storm now hung in the air, specks glinting in sunlight. He turned the key and the engine hiccuped, but wouldn't turn over. He tried again, pumping the gas pedal, but couldn't get the car to start. He thumped the steering wheel with the side of his fist. "What's the matter?" Ruby asked. "Wish I knew." He pulled the handle and pushed, but the door wouldn't budge. "Shit," he said, and pressed his shoulder against it. It swung open and shaved through the drift that had piled around the car overnight. He stepped out and saw the strange patterns the storm had left in the naked fields around them. A long, smooth plain gave way to sawtooth ridges, chevrons softened into stretches of lines scalloped like fish scales, land that looked like soft waves lapping against a riverbank flushed into another flat field. He went to the front of the car and unlatched the hood. He tightened each spark plug and made sure the fan belt was intact. He felt around the engine. There were no cracks or leaks, and it seemed everything was where it should be. He told Ruby to try to start it. She scooted across the bench and turned the key. The fan belt stuttered forward and stalled. She leaned out the window and asked, "Should I try it again?" "Hold on," he said, and unfastened the air filter. He knocked it against the fender. Dust fell from between the ridges. He put it back in place, slapped the front fender a couple of times, and said, "Okay, now." She turned the key, but once more the fan belt jerked forward and froze. Whatever was wrong was beyond his knowledge. He lowered the hood and stepped around to the side of the car. She slid back across the bench. "What are we supposed to do?" "We sit here and wait," he said. "Sooner or later, someone will come down this road and see us." "What if they don't?" "They will." "Who are we to them?" "Just a couple of people who got caught in the storm." It hadn't been more than an hour when she suggested that they should start walking. "Where to?" he asked. They waited a while more. Then a small cloud of dust bubbled on the horizon, and he saw a wrecker coming their way. "Thank God," he said, and stepped out of the car. He waved, and the wrecker pulled alongside them. A bald-headed man wearing coveralls stepped down from the cab. His skin looked like tanned leather. He squinted and asked, "Y'all having some kind of trouble?" "We got stuck in the storm. Can't get the car to start." "I can have a look you'd like. We'll take any help we can get." "Roman," the man said and held out his hand. Eugene introduced himself, shook Roman's hand, and pointed the car and said, "That's my sister, Ruby." Roman hunched down, looked into the car, and waved. "Nice to meet you, miss," he said. Then he quietly asked Eugene, "What in the hell happened to her?" "Bad luck with men," Eugene said. Roman nodded as if it was a story he understood. He popped the hood and after a brief look, lowered it. Ruby stuck her head out the window and asked, "Aren't you going to fix it?" "Sorry." "Can't," Roman said. "Not here." "What do you mean?" Eugene asked. "The works are all gummed up, your engine's packed with dust. Who knows what all else might be wrong?" "What'll it take to get us up and running again?" "I can't say for sure on site," Roman told him, "but I got a little shop in town if you'd like me to take a closer look." "Any chance we could be back on the road today?" Ruby asked. Roman pointed to the airflow and said, "Not in this." Eugene dragged his hand over his mouth. Thankful as he was they'd been found, they were still stranded. "Tell you what," Roman said, "let me tow you back into town. You can get a room at the Rose Rock Hotel for the night, and I can have a better idea of how long it'll take to fix your car sometime tomorrow." "What would you guess right now?" Ruby asked. Roman pursed his lips and looked at the airflow. "A few days," he said. "Could be a week." "A week?" Eugene held up his hand to calm her and said, "A ride into town would be great, thanks." He tossed the keys to Roman, who hooked the airflow to the wrecker. Then they climbed into the cab. "Where are we anyway?" Ruby asked. "Cochran, Oklahoma." Eugene asked, "What's that near?" Roman said, "No place in particular." On their way into town, they passed bare, brown fields, and Eugene asked, "Don't they farm here?" "They do," Roman told him, "but the wheat doesn't grow like it used to." "There's still some stands," he said, pointing to the small swatches of color in the distance. "I think most of them may have even survived the storm, but that won't matter unless there's rain." "Bad drought?" Eugene asked. "Awful," Roman told him. Men have been losing their minds over it, inclined to cut off a finger if it had caused some drizzle. Ruby asked, "How do they get by?" "Relief checks help keep them afloat, subsidies, though I imagine any one of them would rather make their money seeing a crop through to the end." They passed a small wooden shack with a couple of pumps out front. Roman said, "That's where I'll be if you need me." The main thoroughfare was lined with flat-topped 1- and 2-story red brick buildings. There were people behind windows and walking about, like ghosts of a town that didn't know it had died. "There's not much here, is there?" Ruby asked. "It's more than most places around here have got," Roman told her. "It may not look like much, but later tonight, folks from all around will come here." "To do what?" "There's places to eat, things to do, but they mostly come to walk around and talk and just be among each other." Eugene was surprised when they pulled up to the hotel. He'd been expecting a small motor lodge, but the Stone Rose was a beautiful, broad building, taller than everything else around it by a couple of stories. Roman said, "They'll be able to square you away with a room. You can figure out what you want to do once we know what all is wrong with your car." "Appreciate it," Eugene said. He grabbed their luggage and led his sister inside. They made their way through the lobby, passing a 3-tier stone fountain that had run dry, empty planters alongside support pillars and sitting areas with small chandeliers hanging over them. Eugene guessed there must have been a time when this town had imagined it would be something greater than it became. A short, slender man with thinning hair stood behind the reception desk. As they approached, he caught sight of Ruby, and though his eyes widened in a mix of curiosity and concern, he was polite enough not to stare. "How can I help you?" he asked and smiled. His teeth were small and round, like little pebbles. "My sister and I need a room." "How long will you be staying?" "Tonight for sure, maybe a few nights after that too." "Let me see if I have anything available," Mr. Pebbleteeth said, and began turning the pages of a guest book. "I can put you in 203, he said. 301 and 404 are open too." "Any one of those would be fine," Eugene said. "There's a good view from 404. "Will you just pick one and put us in it?" Ruby snapped. "Yes, miss," Mr. Pebbleteeth said. He closed the guest book and retreated from behind the counter. Take it easy, Eugene whispered. You take it easy, she said. My face is throbbing against my skull. I need to lie down. I need some ice. I need aspirin. Mr. Pebbleteeth returned with the luggage cart and loaded up their suitcases. After he escorted them to their room, he asked if there was anything else that they needed. Eugene pulled one of the bills he'd stolen off the bar in Santa Fe from his pocket, handed it to Mr. Pebbleteeth, and said, "Get her some ice, will you?" Mr. Pebbleteeth looked at the bill, nodded happily, and pulled the empty luggage cart out of the room. Ruby sat down in front of the vanity and said, "You tipped him too much. It's only ice. We're as good as broke. $1 won't make a difference. Besides," Eugene said, "we don't want anyone here knowing we're hard up for cash." Ruby touched the split, swollen flesh of her lip and winced. Then she began to trace the patterns in the etched glass mirror and said, "Jesus. At least we aren't stranded on the side of the road anymore. That's an improvement. Maybe." She looked at her reflection, the purpling bruises surrounding her eye and on her neck, and said, "We're still stuck." "I know," he said. "I'll figure something out. First thing you can figure out is where to get me some aspirin. You should have that fella do it for you. You tipped him enough." "It's okay," he said. "I could use the walk." He went down to the lobby and asked Mr. Pebbleteeth where to go. He told him to head a few blocks down to the Red Lion. They carry some of everything, he said. On his way there, Eugene passed the Horizon Diner, a little hash house filled with empty four tops and a long counter where a couple of men perched on stools and ate sandwiches, to Liberty, a two-screen theater that was running a double feature of monster movies and some swashbuckling and romance pictures, and a small building with windows painted over that Eugene assumed was a bar. But many of the buildings were vacant, and pasted in one of the cracked windows was a newspaper article, on it a drawing of magnificent skyscrapers rising from the wheat fields. The headline read, "Cochrane, Oklahoma, America's next metropolis." The text of the article was sun-faded, but he picked up the gist. There'd been good wheat years during and after the Great War and good money to go with it. They thought it would last forever. They'd even imagined this dirt pile would become a great city. Looking at it now, it was hard to believe they'd ever entertained the idea. As he walked, he cataloged their assets. A broken down car, their luggage, the stolen gold watch, the stolen pistol, the few dollars he had in his wallet, the bills he'd stolen from the bar in Santa Fe, minus the $1 he'd given to Mr. Pebbleteeth, and the 4 more his sister had stolen from the man who now lay dead in Santa Fe. They could probably get 15 to 20 for the pistol, maybe a little more for the watch, but for what it would cost to fix the car and stay at the Stone Rose, they'd be right back where they started. Before he went into the Red Lion, he took the gold watch from his pocket and put it on. It hung loose from his wrist, but still gave the impression of wealth. Inside, he scanned the shelves, trying to come up with a plan to get them out of there so they could move on to whatever came next. When he got back to the hotel, Ruby was still sitting in front of the vanity, but now she held a handkerchief packed with ice pressed against her eye. He set a sack on the bed, dug out the bottle of aspirin, and handed it to her. A glass water jug and a set of cups sat on the vanity. She filled one up and shook out a few pills. She tossed them into her mouth, chased them with a gulp of water, and said, "It's probably going to look a lot worse before it gets any better." "It'll be a while," he said, "but you'll heal." He pulled out a skein of yarn, a bag of clothespins, a sack of sugar, and a bag of saltpeter. "What's all that for?" He took the basin from the dresser, set it on the bed, and asked, "Do you remember Victor Lustig?" "Sure," she said. "He was the con man who got sent to Alcatraz for counterfeiting a couple years back." Eugene scooped sugar and saltpeter into the basin and said, "Before all that, he sold the Eiffel Tower. He went to Paris after the World's Fair, posed as some sort of official, and set up meetings with all the scrap metal dealers in the city. By the time they realized the tower wasn't his to sell, he was gone, and their money was too." "What's your point?" He grabbed the jug from the vanity and poured a stream of water into the basin and stirred until the sugar and saltpeter had dissolved and the solution was cloudy. "The people here don't have much for us to take. Hell, we could pull wallets all day, and I can't imagine it'd amount to much." He unraveled the skein of yarn and fed it into the basin to soak. "If we want their money, they'll have to give it to us of their own accord." Ruby laughed and said, "I hate to break it to you, but there's no Eiffel Tower here. I don't need there to be." "Then what are you going to sell them?" He pulled an end of yarn from the basin, laid it across the vanity to dry, and said, "Rain." "Thank you." is Ananda Lima.
Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Happy birthday, Jonathan. Thank you, Wyatt and Barbara and Megan and Adam and my Sewanee awesome friends, family, for your intelligence, generosity, and hilarity, and for making a home for me here in Tennessee, which I would never have imagined would happen. So today I'm going to do a mixed approach. I'm going to read a little bit of fiction and some poetry. I think I'm emboldened by our cocktails that we are, special cocktails we're mixing at the French house. Hopefully the mix will be a little better than that. Another advantage of this approach is that it takes a little bit more time, so I have less time for jokes like these. So this story, I'll start with this story. It'll be just the beginning of it. I started writing it around the time the pictures of the children in cages started popping up everywhere, and their blankets. And it plays with this idea of the immigrant as some sort of boogeyman, they don't send us our best, that kind of thing. And it also plays, like many of my short stories and some of my poetry, with this Brazilian literary art movement from the 1920s, which started with the Cannibalist Manifesto. And it's called Antropófaga. She devoured tiny Americans that came out of the vending machine. They slid out inside thin metallic plastic packages, which almost opened themselves when punctured. Emerging from their wrapping with their tiny hands on either side of the rib, they proclaimed their nutritional content: calcium, sugar, fat, 350 milligrams of synthetic protein. Sometimes she decided to diet and promised no more Americans. But she walked by with an eye on the spot between the Ruffles and the Doritos, salivating. And before thinking too much about it, there she was again, inserting the coins hot and sweaty from her palms into the machine's mouth. The first time, it'd been a pinkish, overweight man, flowery shirt, white sneakers, and socks biting at his thick ankles. It's kind of like what I was wearing yesterday. So he laughed and talked to invisible friends, pointing at things only he could see in his surroundings. He didn't notice when she lifted him up, index finger and thumb under his little armpits. Holding a selfie stick with a phone the size of a lentil, he posed in front of her giant mouth as if she were the Statue of Liberty. Right after the timer took the picture, Bea swallowed him whole. All right. So that's the beginning of the story. And I will read some poems. I forgot to put my timer, but I timed it. Okay. So I will start with this poem. It's written in this form, which is the American sentence, which is basically just an Americanized haiku. So just a sentence with 17 syllables. And it was named by Allen Ginsberg, and it was, Ashbery wrote a poem called 37 Haiku, where you can read the poem as one whole poem or 37 little poems, which reminded me a little bit of Charles's, one of the poems that you read here. But mine is not 37, it's just 7, baby steps. And I wrote it around an anniversary of Sandra Bland's death. 7 American sentences. In the beginning were people who lived here before. In the beginning of spring, spirits hovering over the waters. The vault, evening, morning, sky, the second day after a shooting. Body, let it serve as a sign to mark times and days and years. Correction, George Washington's teeth were never made of wood. In the beginning of the end, missing signal for lane change. And on the seventh day, same thing again, only some rested. All right. So this next one, the next one, I was at a party, talking about the letter A, as one does. I forgot to thank Birmingham Poetry Review and Adam Vines for publishing that previous poem, so that's why I read it. Thank you. Such great company there. But this poem, I was at a party talking about the letter A, and we were talking about how it seems to come from a hieroglyph for ox, so that this kind of situation, so it's the head of an ox. And then when I went home, I was thinking of, my people, my family's people in Brazil, they're from the Northeast, where the biggest tragedy and what sends people in migration historically is drought. So the picture of drought is always this cow's head on the cracked soil. And my name has these 3 cow heads there. So I was just thinking about that when I wrote this poem. And it's called Arroyo, and it's in Nathaniel Mackey's form. I have a lot of those. So it sort of looks like people running or fleeing, I think. And it's after the song Triste Bahia. They say the first letter of my name evolved from a picture of a carcass, a cabeça de vaca sem as suas costelas expostas like claws or jaws, ancient. My neighbor says not to let my son sleep on my bed, but I do. I know the terror. At night, I'm haunted by my great-great-great-grandparents, dry on cracked soil, na Bahia in the bones they inhabit on my bed. In America, I learned that arroyos are paths carved by the rain, but I already knew. At night, the cracked soil calls for me as cabeças de vaca of my greats, calling and calling. I tell them, I don't know you, but I do. The city spine is a bifurcation solidified in calcium. In America, they eat the bagasse of oranges and say my name means bliss. I am in love with bone-white concrete. The spine of the city sits fleshless and free of scales, flexible bones that bend and keep bending and keep bending and bending right up until they snap. All right. Okay, so this next poem, all right. Can't believe my little piece of paper numbers are working. All right. So I was like, I'm gonna get confused, but no. All right, so this poem is part of a series I've been working on. I read a different one of these last year, where I'm playing a lot of access, often with bilingual poems, and I do things like I use, for example, repeating forms. Instead of having a repetition, I have a translation to make sort of a unified poem that confuses the original, what's translation. This one, though, what I did is I sort of mashed up the villanelle with that Nathaniel Mackey's form. And the refrain comes in Portuguese mostly. And it's after a song called You Don't Know Me by Caetano Veloso. And the title is Bob Dylan's Prize. Eu, você, nós dois, Caetano and my boy sleeping in his car seat. Já temos passado, meu amor. His accent and exile songs like mine expand over eu, você, nós dois, the suburban backyard, quintais, jardins de lá, de além, com seus passados and songs. Our song seems to slide off shingles, shake the orange leaves of the trees. Eu, Caetano, nós dois, but our voices are always confined by a seal of glass, longe do passado que já não temos. Lá, fora, a seal of metal and borracha keep the outside the car. E eu, você, nós dois, menininhos e nossos passados divergente que já temos. All right. And then this is the last poem. This one, I think I sort of am I finished this collection, putting it together, and I think this poem captures a lot of what I'm working with the collection, and I was also reminded of it in Bob Hass's awesome craft lecture when he mentioned Forrest Gander's quote on slavery and cotton and sugar, and that's very much what I'm playing with this poem, because I see sugar as the history that I'm a part of in Brazil, and then cotton is the sort of American equivalent, and I see America as the land of my son. And it's called Line. I inherited from my mother the knobbly joints and square ends of my fingers. From my father, I got the habit of biting my nails. Their shortness, the frayed missing skin had never bothered me, but now I have a son, and he has begun to bite too. In America, I learned that one can snap a rubber band against my wrist each time my hands reaches up towards the mouth. On the back of my hand, the rubber band disappears into the color of my skin, but when I turn and face the inner side, it is a clear division of my body. The first time I saw a cotton tree, I found it beautiful. The cotton, so white in its brown cradle, so soft against the square tips of my fingers, I squeezed the dead flower around it and felt joy from hearing it crackle. As children, we had cups full of sugar cane. We chewed on it and spit out the bagasse. Toothless men ran the knobbly stalks through a machine. The juice trickled into our glasses, and the flat piece that came out on the other side was put through it again until everything was gone. The dry split stalk thrown into a pile, limp like blonde hair. When I first arrived in America, I didn't understand what people meant when they said with an American accent that they were Irish or Italian or French. Now that I understand, I asked my mother for a family tree. She said she had never thought of such things, and she wouldn't know much past her grandmother's first name. So what I have is my memory of the faces of my relatives and my own. When I first arrived in America, all I could see was beauty. The snow, fine like sugar, white like cotton, but now the beauty, the land, the tired metaphors just make me sad. Before I left for America, I saw an individual in the mirror, but today I see my father, my mother, my brothers, my son, and a man missing skin from tears on his back, and the man who did it. When I looked this morning, I tugged on my rubber band so hard that it broke. Thank you. All right. Thank you. All right. Thank you so much, and now welcome the amazing Kate Jayroe.
Good morning, welcome, and thank you. I'll be reading a short story. Cats and dogs. There are men in my life. Chad is my boyfriend. Chad is a gorgeous, young, all sinew and ass, a tall glass of water with a lilting essence of naughtiness well hidden. Brad is my coworker. I have a crush on Brad. Brad is quite attractive in a devil-may-care kind of fashion. Brad is tall, dark, and handsome. He is older than I, and as such has a confidence and charm I both aspire to in myself and respond to in involuntary ways. I also have a crush on Chad, of course. Chad is my sweetums. Chad is like the perfect home-cooked meal that will also tie you up and suck your clit if you ask the perfect home-cooked meal to do that. After you have eaten perfect home-cooked meal for the 10 millionth time and still manage to taste joy and nice flavors within. More important than that, I am in love with Chad. He knows some of my fear. We share meals, pheromones. If one of us falls ill, the other of us either will or will not fall ill. I give Chad most of my winks. Chad grooms me into the nights. Brad does not know these things about me. If Brad fell ill, I might not even know unless he happened to be near me for a work-related project and grabbed a tissue, or if he fashioned eye contact with me to let me know he was communicating only with me. And in that moment, as our pupils diamonded in societally bridled lust, Brad said, "Oh, dear me, I've fallen ill. I am ill at this time." Remember my recent absence from our place of employment and core affirmation in this absurd reality? Illness was the cause. Chad and I are always expanding our intimacy by confining each other to just the other of us, and really diving in deep waters of our interests, tastes, and turn-offs, while simultaneously building our individual brands of resentment as a result of watching our mutual projections of one another crumble into not daddy and not mommy. As a result of the ensuing seafoam wreck of intimate knowledge of each other and also of ourselves. Perhaps most important for me is the reality that Chad is not Brad. Chad can be very private, as can Brad. But I know Chad because of time and intercourse. Yet Chad's true to himself nature renders him still private, even to me, despite me in his life, plus time. This private nature drives me wild. I am such not this way. Me, an open book, bleeding heart, buttered muffin. I feel my thirst for unadulterated adoration go unquenched. He pursues aromantic interests that are individualistic in nature. He is interested in fashioning wooden things from large pieces of wood, for an example. He is suddenly good at juggling. One more. It seems that I am the stale little rice cake on the shelf with but a dash of cinnamon. At work, I am no longer apple of Chad's eye in much the same way as I once was. It used to be he could not keep his hands the way I drove him. The passion, breathing. Each passing week, Chad becomes more distant, though we file in and out the building as one, flocked, ascending and descending the arc of our earnings each time the sun does one or the other for that day. We blow off steam with dirty waters. We speak of Brad. Oh, Chad is also my coworker. Brad is also Chad's coworker. Chad also has a crush on Brad. On more than one occasion, I have suspected that Brad finds Chad to be a fine specimen of coworker. I get him all this way. I am a company gal, and I live my life in honest, unashamed transparency of my particular codependence and floofy, hot nature. I wish that Chad would look at me the way that I look at Brad. I look at Brad in a way that says, for nigh on 3 years, I fought and fought to not succumb to the panty-sopping lust that envelops me when we so much as flounder eye as you exit the restroom, and I look over, the universe alerting my body to your presence before you could even do such, and sniffing your approach somehow preternaturally, I now experience this familiar terror of you seeing me, see you too well. And though I am ashamed and ruddy at my brow. More than that, my nipples are stoned and in your command. And eventually I did give in. I'll never forget the first night I allowed myself to whisper, "Brad," in a hushed hiss as I came, shuddering quick in my blushing sheets. And when I told Chad I was finally brave enough to jack off to you, Brad, Chad laughed, but was also taken aback by the daring of it all. This is when Chad and I were co-workers, but not yet boyfriend-girlfriend, though we had had extensive biblical knowings of one another, held in private in our home's beds, and also in public, me screaming out in a little echo above a compost bucket with people's shit in it beside a highway overpass. And now, I cherish all these moments and scrapbook them away for when I'm alone and needing a big come to keep on living in this fucked world. You're a star in this show. That is the way I look at Brad. That is the way I wish that Chad would look at me like. My boyfriend before Chad is not my coworker. But the boyfriend before Chad is my coworker, and is also Chad's coworker, and is also a coworker of Brad's. They all quite enjoy being around one another and hope to have work and work-related projects where they can all gesticulate in their unique but similar ways and push their glasses up their noses and readjust their large and ready cocks so that they are upward in the waistband and not visible to the unlooking eye, so that they could all descend upon me in a wanton yet considerately scheduled flash of rampant grab ass in the biggest elevator around at our place of employment and core affirmation in our absurd reality. They'd all congratulate one another upon pleasing me, and I would sleep alone that night, free to touch my own self, safe in the fantasy of recent memory, and away from that crushing hunger of men, the crude tang of their swarthy, boiled bouts of heat. Chad and Brad are the same astrological sign. It is a sign that is infamous for being this sort of way. Though sometimes people of this sign act in that sort of way. Wow. Now, I am no fool. Fantasy is not reality. Reality is a fine time and a privilege to ache in. Fantasy is a train where no one knows where they are going, and they are all shouting as if they are surprised by the movement, though they'd been counting on the movement the entire time, or else they would not have boarded a train. I realize Brad is a Grecian urn, or whatever. And Chad is Marlboro Man next door, waiting to delight me, should I put in the work of both him and myself, since we are talking about a man, and this is about the men in my life. Cats and dogs, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone, too. Thank you.